Welcome to the Fionia podcast. This is our first edition of this podcast, and we really look forward to the conversations with you, Pernille Dahlgaard. It's a pleasure to be here at the Mærsk Kinney Møller Zero Carbon Center. I practiced that name, and I think I got it almost right now.
Almost,
yeah.
And thank you.
It's great to be here. And you are the Chief Impact Officer here at do we just say Zero Carbon Center? That's easier.
We normally just say the center.
The center, yeah, that's what I say. So you are the Chief Impact Officer at the center.
Exactly.
And the first thing I'm very curious about is your route into this position in this Zero Carbon Center. So maybe you can tell a little bit about your route into the shipping industry and why you chose to take this position at this center.
Thank you very much, and thanks for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be here. I'm an old lady, so I have a long history behind me, and hopefully an exciting history ahead of me. I'm a trained economist, and I think the only one thing that I knew when I was young was that I wanted to have an international career, and being an economist brought me into the ministerial work, where I spent a couple of years in the Ministry of Energy and Environment. And then I saw this advertisement for a company in Denmark, it was big, called Mærsk, looking for international economists, or economists for an international career. And I was like, wait, that sounds like me. So that brought me into shipping. I had very little knowledge about what a ship was. I've never been sailing. I do have a great-grandfather who was a captain, so that sort of did link me a little bit to the seafarer. I have an anchor, as a little golden anchor somewhere, but otherwise I knew nothing about shipping. But the beauty about Mærsk is that it brings you across the world. It brings you in all kind of contexts. You move around. They're quite good at spotting what are your talents. And so I came to West Africa, spent some years in Cameroon as the CFO there. I did quite a bit of transformation work. I like to make changes, so I've done carve-outs, I've done build-up of new business units, I've done post-merger integrations, I've also done internal transformations, etc. So that was a very good way into shipping. After 15 years, I moved on to Accenture, where I got the technology side to it. That was both in France and in Singapore. And then I got the luck to be admitted into PSA, the biggest port terminal operator in the world, still in Singapore. Again, doing transformations of all kinds of shapes and forms. That brought me to Belgium, where I did a post-merger integration still for PSA. And then I think now it's 7 years ago, so it sounds longer. A friend of mine, he said, Pernille, decarbonization, that is the future. And I was like, decarbonization, what does that mean? I'd never heard the word. And then we talked about it, and I was like, yeah, actually, decarbonization is important. And then I thought about how do you do that in shipping? Because if you are a concrete factory, you can decarbonize your factory. But in shipping, everything is so intertwined and everything is international and it's heavy capex and things last for 25 years. I was like, if you want to do that, you need to bring the full ecosystem together somehow and make everybody move at the right speed in the right sequence. I was like, that's virtually impossible. And then all of a sudden I read in the newspaper that the family foundation behind Mærsk had decided to give a generous donation to create a center that did exactly that. Bring the ecosystem together in order to drive the global shipping world towards decarbonization.
And here it's important to note that Mærsk as a shipping company and the center, as we call it here, are two completely separate units, so there's no management control or financial.
The center is a independent not-for-profit working for the greater good of the world. We're not rolling into the Mærsk organization. We have a foundation structure, so we are 100% independent. But we have the funny name, and we have been established thanks to this generous donation by the family foundation. So there I was looking at that center. I say, hey, this is where I need to work, and this is where hopefully I can bring some of my transformation skills and change management and maybe visionary thinking to play.
So you
that brought me
saw
to
you
the
saw
center.
the center before the center saw you in a way. So you
That is
noticed, you
absolutely
saw them in
correct.
the landscape. This would be a place for me to work. And then,
Yeah.
but how did you then get into that direction? That's an interesting thing, because I think a lot of us have that. We see something that could be exciting, but that's a thing. But to get there,
Then when I see something I want to do, I typically figure out who is the highest placed, who knows anything about it, and I wrote the guy who was becoming the CEO, and told him that he could not do this center without me. And I thought that was very convincing. He did not, because he didn't reply. I heard nothing back.
Okay.
And after a
strong
while,
move.
came out sort of the first like C-suite or managerial positions, and I figured out this position, that's mine. So I sent him a new message saying, of course, I'm sure you're super busy and just want you to let you know that I've applied for this position. I still heard nothing back. And then I got into an interview process, and very quickly I was ditched. And then I was like, okay, apparently this center is not for me. And so anyway, I was in Singapore, I was happy, had a good life, I had a good job. So I was like, yeah, that's fine with that center. Then a couple of years later, after COVID, I was back in Denmark. And it turned out that the guy who got my job, so to speak, he all of a sudden I saw on LinkedIn that he got a new job. And I was like, what's then happening with his job? And then I was a little bit like, that center, they didn't want me, so who cares? But then an old friend sent me a message when my job, so to speak, came up and said, hey, Pernille, is that not your job? I said, maybe I should just reach out to the headhunter and ask whether he has time. And then it went very quickly. So I called the headhunter, or I sent a message to the headhunter. He called me for an interview. He said, you were already on the shortlist. And then after a few weeks.
it was your job.
So it was my job.
Not only in your head, but it was indeed.
But it took a few rounds. And
No,
to
but
me, it's
that's,
a
I
nice
think
story
here
to
we,
show how sometimes the world may not have discovered
exactly.
how things
No, I
should
think
work.
it's an important insight, actually, the persistence, and not always. Of course, sometimes you want to say, well, it actually does make sense, but also to leave it and let it take its time, and then take the move.
Yeah.
So you referred to when you discovered this center. What was the sort of the main reason for you to work? You've been moving from a highly commercial world with the terminal industry and PSA and post-merger and so on, and Mærsk as well, to now a non-profit. Is that non-profit that sort of attracted you? The purpose, or what was the attractive to go into that route in your career?
It took me a little while. Actually, my husband, he teased me that I was working for an NGO, and it took me a while to accept that, yes, I'm working for an NGO. Where I come from, working for an NGO is something hippie, where you're sitting in the corner and smoking something you shouldn't smoke. So that sort of had required a little mental shift. But I think what I really enjoy with the center is we have this very clear purpose. Our mission is to drive the global maritime industry to net zero in 2050. It's very concrete. It's also very big, and it's super complex. So the mission and what we want to do, and everybody who works for the center really want to do that, is super attractive. And then on top of that, the way we have organized the center is we are bringing our strategic partners, which cover the full ecosystem. So we have technology majors, we have shipping companies, we have energy majors, we have classification societies, we have lawyers, we have consultants, and all of these cargo owners, main engine producers, etc. All of them are sending 3 of their best people into the center. So we have an extremely deep knowledge base. I usually say I'm the dumb one who just have an MBA. Most people at the center have a PhD. And having all these incredibly knowledgeable and clever people working on one purpose is amazing.
Yeah, that must be amazing.
And it's extremely inspiring.
Yeah.
So some of the, I mean, I've been in various big multinationals where you have a lot of internal politics. And of course we have differences of opinions, but the direction is crystal clear. And if you're not buying into that direction, you don't want to be at the center.
No.
So
the purpose is crystal clear.
The purpose is crystal clear, and people really want to work towards that.
Yeah.
And people realize that in order to reach that purpose, we need to collaborate. So there's a very strong collaborative spirit.
Cool. We will, in this podcast, we will make a link so that our viewers can just take a read and see a little more about also members and others and purpose. So now you've been here for, is it
2.5 years?
2.5 years now.
Yeah.
If you should point at one experience that has been most important, like a highlight to you, what would that then have been in your time here and why?
One of my responsibilities is on the regulatory area, and relatively shortly after I joined the center, the IMO MEPC decided this revision of their decarbonization strategy, or the greenhouse gas strategy, where they went from aiming to reach that 50% of the fleet would reach net zero in 2050 to that the entire fleet has to reach net zero around 2050. That was a massive step, because obviously if it is only 50% of the fleet, likely 95% of the fleet plans to be in the lacking 50%, right? So it doesn't really bring you anywhere. But now, as a ship owner, you don't have a choice. You know that around 2050 you have to be reach net zero. So that was an amazing.
And the ship lasts for 20
an average
years.
ship sails for 25 years.
25 years. So it means actually if you are getting a new building in 2025, you know.
If you're building something today, you better think about how do you want to bring that to net zero in 2050. And of course that only becomes stronger and stronger. Yeah. So that was a fascinating moment where all of a sudden the world agreed that global shipping has to reach net zero. Now you have a number of those. I mean, we have IPCC, we have a number of agreements about ambitions and the NDCs, like the targets for carbon emission on a national level, etc. But what then happened after that was that there was a decision that in 2025 an agreement should be reached in terms of how are we going to make this work. So that should be through a basket of technical and economic measures. And what we have done in the center, and of course this is the result of an enormous amount of people working together, but I do think that we have a tiny little part of the, say, or we have contributed a tiny little part thanks to our, we have a techno-economic model that can simulate the global fleet of the world and say if we are making, introducing a carbon tax of $200, what will that mean to the decision process of course on a macro level to move the fleet towards net zero? If we are introducing a goal-based fuel standard at this rate, what will that mean?
So those are tools that are sort of aimed very much towards decision takers on the political level. So what happens if we do this and this regulatory part?
Exactly. So when you're designing the regulation, you just like the Ministry of Finance, when you come up with a new taxation on, say, electrical cars, they will look at what does that mean to the development, the replacement of the fleet of cars. What will it mean to the money that you get into to the national treasury, with both negative and positive and so on. So what we can do with our integrated assessment model is when member states started to present proposals to what kind of measures would they recommend to this regulation, we could evaluate that and say, according to our model, and this is of course it is not science, or it's not exact science, it's not the truth, but it is an input to, according to our model with our assumptions, this will give you this much.
Yeah. Because there's such a big complexity,
it's
kind of
complex.
needed. Yeah, that
we are talking about 100,000 vessels around the world.
Yeah.
We're simulating decision makers, but we also know that whenever you're simulating other people's decisions, I mean, there's something emotional you can't account for. There's something that's rational, but it probably gives a direction. It gives a direction, exactly, and an outcome space.
I was thinking, Pernille, do they also develop tools on, let's say, on the micro level? So if you are in a shipping company and you have to take decision, let's say, on a new building, and you can use scrubber, non-scrubber, what kind of dual fuel, non-dual fuel. Do you also have tools developed to help these concrete decision takers?
So what we did after in April at the MEPC 83, where this agreement on what is the goal-based fuel standard and what is the economic mechanism was agreed. It's still to be adopted in October. But based on that, we have made what we call our compliance cost calculator, where you can go as an individual ship owner and say, if I buy a ammonia vessel today, what will that look like compared to a fuel vessel? So yes, we have a little tool that can help decision makers on a micro level to look at what's the fuel cost development over time.
Yeah, because that's what I hear when we talk to ship owners about all this uncertainty about there are so many alternatives and who will bet on this and bet on that, but we don't know exactly, for instance, in terms of alternative fuels. So that's definitely a need for help, and a need for I presume constant updating in terms of technology development and policy development. In this respect, I think it would be interesting to hear also, the center has existed for how long now? Is it
4.5 years?
4.5 years. And if you say, what would be sort of if we say next phase, so let's say, for instance, the next 5 years, do we have a specific, is it a continuation of the present direction, or is there a new phase now that the center is moving into?
It's a super good question, because obviously over 5 years a lot has changed, and not only has the center developed, but also the world around us have developed. 5 years ago, when we started the center, there was a lot of focus on climate change, a lot of focus on decarbonization. I was told that people were almost literally queuing up to become partners to the center. Now we have war in the Middle East, we have war in Ukraine, we have a geopolitical tension that's completely different. So the focus also from a number of our partners is taking different places. At the same time, we also have this global regulation, which makes, you could say, pulls in the other direction, because that is actually the first global industry-wide carbon regulation you have in the world.
That's the IMO regulation that you are referring to.
The greenhouse gas regulation that was agreed in April.
Yeah.
Where you both have to pay for your carbon emission, and you also have to drive down your carbon intensity over time. So that's a fantastic step in the right direction. What we have done over the last half year is that we have revisited our strategy. We have concluded that our mission of reaching net zero for the globe, or pushing the global fleet to net zero in 2050, still stands. It's still needed. So whether or not there's focus or not is not so important. At the same time, we also see from a number of ship owners that maybe also thanks to the EU ETS and FuelEU Maritime that has entered into force over the last couple of years, that shipping companies are still very focused. They might not be excited, but they realize that there's a need to understand all this. So what we see, back to your question, what are the key focus areas for the next 3 years? A big challenge is the green fuel. Where should it come from? And how will we make that cost down happen, that even with the IMO regulation, where there would be a big penalty to fossil fuel, there's still a cost gap to be closed. So that's really important to find ways to scale fuel production. One of the, you could say, should be easier is the whole uptake of energy efficiency technology on the vessels. There's a lot of available proven, excellent payback technology available. But
so
for
you don't have
various
to
reasons,
take the big step towards a completely new fuel, but within the existing
but simply
regime of
say,
fuel,
when you're
there
a
are
ship owner
optimization.
or a ship operator,
Yeah.
you can actually do a lot to save your fuel or to save
True.
fuel. And of course, from a climate perspective, the best fuel is the fuel you don't burn. And also from an economic perspective for the operator, it should also be a no-brainer. But there are some systemic challenges in the way that the shipping industry works that is preventing some of that uptake to happen.
One of the things that I really sort of thought was mind-blowing was when I realized, for instance, in the tanker industry, that they're trading the goods on the vessel while they are on the water. So you will find that a lot of the seafarers following this, of course, know that then you sail in one direction, then suddenly with the same cargo turning around, then you sail it maybe 2 or 3 times across the Atlantic for economic reasons, but absolutely terrible for the climate, right? That you are
Exactly.
So there should be so many
And
opportunities
it shows
to
that
smarter trade, right?
yeah, and it shows that maritime transportation is just incredibly cheap, because otherwise you wouldn't do that.
That's true.
And other
Compared to the value of the cargo that you sail around with, there's some
Exactly.
marginal costs.
Yeah. Likewise, you see, especially in the tramper business, that a lot of vessels are speeding up because the demurrage for coming late is high. So they sail very fast until they are within reach, and then they go very slow. If they plan better, they will get much better fuel economics, will be much better for the climate. And if they are confident that they can still reach the port on time, it should be a complete win-win.
Yeah.
But there are those are some of the mechanisms in
Yeah.
the industry trade that makes people be more reluctant to take up technology that could be, or even operational measures that from you could say at a desktop or a business case perspective seem to be no-brainers.
It does, and the direction would probably be that things are happening with digitalization and the more connected vessels, and you can kind of things we couldn't do 10, 15 years ago would now be possible. For
Absolutely.
instance, to plan also on the routes and on the speed and other things, and that could be where they merge.
And one example here is that we are discussing where do we want the industry to be in 2030, and one of the what we call goalposts or flags that we expect is that in 2030 all vessels should have technology on board so they can do proper data-driven performance management. And when we talk about that being important, it is that today a lot of vessels don't have that technology. They don't. The way when you're bunkering, you put a meter stick down there. You don't have flow meters. I remember at Mærsk that was installed it's probably almost 20 years ago. I was flabbergasted when I realized that apparently they didn't have a flow meter. I mean, imagine you go and you fuel your diesel car, and you don't know how much.
No idea how much diesel there's in it, but it's good that I have the stick with me today.
Exactly.
I can put it in.
I mean, what kind of wealth is that?
Yeah,
that's true. And I think that's a nice example of where sometimes, and seafarers of course know all this, but a lot of people from outside of the industry, they don't realize that there are many small steps that can be taken, and each of those will contribute as well.
That's so exciting with this 2030 aim to say here is a fully digitalized rollout towards operations of the vessels. Yeah, and do you then? Well, that must then be in cooperation with a number of key players in development of develops these tools,
so I mean,
right?
What we are looking at is where do we think the industry should be. So we will not be the ones who are securing this happens, but then from that we look at where is it, what is it that we can do as a center where we are particularly well positioned and can help remove some of the barriers for this to happen. So that is, for instance, to work with operators and owners and say, how do we ensure that energy efficiency technology is being installed? How do you split that between you so it's not being ditched because, again, of dysfunctional, or not dysfunctional, but traditional measures that don't, or mechanisms that don't really help.
There's one thing that when I thought about our conversation today, Pernille, that I really wanted us to touch upon, and that is just to get that short overview of where are we now as an industry, the maritime industry, in terms of commitments. These seems to be changing, and now we hear this, now we hear that. But what is sort of the latest update for what have the industry committed to do as these, and now we're talking the 2050?
Yeah. So what's in the agreement that was made in April, and that has to be adopted in October. We very much hope it will be adopted, and we think it will, but it's not adopted before it's adopted. But what's in that agreement is that by 2030, 20% or the industry as such should emit 20% less CO2 than they did in 2008. Ideally 30%, but minimum 20%. And in 2040, the aim or the target is 70, striving to 80%. And then around 2050, it should be down to 0.
Okay, so talking 2030, that's not like science fiction far away. That's
absolutely not
pretty
science
close
fiction.
to where we are.
And remember, this is the industry.
Yeah.
So assuming that the industry will also grow, it means that on the individual vessel in average, you need to see a bigger reduction because otherwise you can't absorb the growth of the industry. So it's quite tangible targets.
Yeah.
And the measures that have been agreed they're not delivering the full thing, but they will deliver part of it. But so it means that more has to happen, but it is really a very good step in the right direction.
If we then take point of departure in these agreements and we say they are being implemented and so on, what would you regard as the most important challenges facing the industry now? If you should point sort of headline wise of 2 or 3 things those are the ones that are real big challenges that you see out there that everybody, all seafarers, should be aware of, that these are huge obstacles.
The very biggest one probably is the availability or lack of same of the green fuel, and we don't. It's unclear to see how, even though the shipping industry is very big, how that will be enough demand and enough committed demand to generate investments into green fuel.
And that's that hen and egg everybody talks about, that you don't create the supply and the infrastructure of the new fuel before you have a demand, so a lot of vessels using this fuel.
Exactly.
And they do not invest in these new vessels creating the demand before they realize that there is actually supply for these. So and
in many parts of the world there's some waiting time, but building a vessel takes approximately a year. Building an ammonia plant takes somewhere between 5 and 7 years. So even though the order books are full, so if you order a vessel today, you won't get it before in 4 years' time. But there's still an imbalance in terms of the lead time.
The one solution that I heard at conferences and other places that I've been that sort of to me made sense, that was the green corridor idea. So you want to say here is a trade where there's a lot of vessels that we know already will sail between these 2 specific ports that are very busy. So let's say, for instance, Rotterdam and Shanghai or something. And a lot of vessels go that direction. And then they have ensured that there would be the supply of the green fuel at these specifics. And then shipping companies can invest because they will do these trades particular. So, but do you believe, is that feasible? Does it work? And where is the status with that?
There's some 70 plus green corridor projects around the world. It's important to say that there's none of these green corridors that are actually operating. So it is on feasibility stage or even pre-feasibility stage. But at the center, we have developed a methodology to do both a pre-feasibility and a feasibility study. Sorry. And what we have seen so far is that initially we set out to test out, is this technically feasible? And yes, it is absolutely technically feasible. The most advanced green corridor in the world is one that we are facilitating from Chile to Japan. Okay. We have the full plan for what does it take from a technical perspective. What we're working on right now is to understand how do we make it financially or economically feasible. And that's where we come back to the cost down of the fuels, that right now in order to sail a vessel on ammonia or on methanol cost somewhere between 4 and 10 times as much as sailing it on.
And who should pay that? Will there any consumers who would be willing to or users?
Ultimately, at some point in time, it's going to be the consumer, right? But it could be through taxpayers. So we are negotiating with Chile whether there are some parts of the infrastructure that can be covered by them. It could be multilateral development funds like the World Bank or Asian Development Bank or other multilaterals. It could be that the ship owner takes a part of it, maybe. So if you look at the full chain or the full system, the cost is sitting all over. So everybody somehow needs to take a share of it. And then the question is, how do you do that in a way that everybody wants to get on board? And of course, part of it will be passed over to the customers. But we also do see some customers who are actually willing to pay more. So we have the Zero Emission Maritime Buyers Alliance, consisting of Patagonia and Nike and IKEA and Amazon and a lot of those companies that have a defined climate target. And they are actually asking for green transportation or maritime transportation, and they're willing to pay for it. Yeah. So there are some good steps, good traction in some areas, but it is a massive industry.
Yeah, I guess it's also a matter of bringing, costs down through technology that become more and more advanced, and those additional costs become lower.
Yeah.
And then at the same time also to find ways to in a way also penalize those who are not taking the steps, because if without the and penalizing means probably taxes, right?
Regulation is the most effective way to make people change.
Yeah.
And that's what we have gotten with IMO now. So we will get regulation that enters into force in 2028.
Yeah.
On top of that, of course, then there will be payment for carbon emission.
Yeah. And that is that's also what, besides the green corridor, always the other convincing argument is tax. So let's make sure that you tax those who are not applying to.
And of course, ideally, we should have a global carbon tax, irrespective of the industry, because the reason that the maritime transportation is so cheap, and the reason that oil is such a cheap energy, is that we are not paying for the externalities. We're not paying for the environmental impact. If we did that at the right price, then everything else would solve itself, right?
Yeah,
but it's just true. Very difficult to make that kind of...
It's huge also because it's such a high level that we are talking about. We touch upon the most important challenges, but I also really want to make sure that we hear about opportunities. So if you should put on the more optimistic, and we also sometimes have to be optimistic, besides all the problems, geopolitical, transition and green and all the problems the world are facing, what are the most sort of encouraging things that makes you sort of keeping up with the hope on working with the transition?
I think first of all, the fact that we have a global industry-wide regulation that has been agreed amongst all the member countries or member states in IMO, that's amazing. It's completely unseen before, and that will be enforced. So that's fantastic. The second part is we see a lot of focus now. I talked about the green energy. China is moving fast, and they are moving big time into green energy. Not only to save the planet, also because they see it's a big business case. They also see it as really important for them to get to become energy independent. But it all leads to the same place, right? So China can build a methanol factory in a year's time. And that solves at least a part of what we talked about before, where the vessel's taking one time and the factory is taking 5 to 7 years.
So when you have these big players, both on the industry side and the state side, including China also, then you also have the recipe for real change. Yeah,
exactly.
If we here at the end, Pernille, should talk about a dream. We talked about this 2030, and I like the year 2030 because it's future, but it's not like distant future. And there's so many uncertainties when we talk about 2050. Who knows? But 2030, that's not around the corner, but that's within reach.
It's within reach, yeah.
If you should sort of visualize, what would be a dream scenario for you for the maritime industry by 2030? Could you then try to put some word on what would you, if we now move fast forward, and we're sitting here and having a conversation in 5 years from now, what would be sort of the industry that we saw by then?
As we talked about, simply the fact that all vessels can actually measure their own performance. That no vessel is being built without the capability of sailing green, and that we see like real green vessel sailing starting to scale up. It's not going to be big scale in 2030, but at least that there's that traction.
Thank you so much. I really like that answer because it moved us to the assets, it moved us to the vessels. And this is, of course, extremely relevant for seafarers because it also places seafarers right in the center of this transition, because this would be not only the machines or the assets or the vessels, but of course also be the people that handle these and that have to be such an important part of that dream.
Exactly.
Thank you so much, Pernille, for being with us for this podcast. Such an interesting conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.